So let's plot those first two things before we go on to the vertex. Where would we plot the 2 for the y-intercept? On what? On the y-axis. It should make sense to you. The y-intercept would go on the y-axis, so you just put a point at 2. I have had several people in both the other classes putting that on the x-axis. We'll think that through. It's the y-intercept. It should go on the y-axis. So we plotted this, the y-intercept. Now, the axis of symmetry, that's that vertical dotted line at 2. And it says x equals 2. So you go on your x-axis for that and draw a vertical dotted line. That's your axis of symmetry. And then somewhere on that axis will be your vertex point, and that's what we're going to find next. And to find your vertex, you put this axis value into the original equation. So you just plug in 2 for the x's. I cannot stress enough to use parentheses on whatever you plug in. Your calculator, especially when you start dealing with squares, which we are now, will not give you the right answer if you don't put it in parentheses. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't.
Wait, so what are you putting in?
You plug it in this 2 that we got for the axis. Plug that in there to figure out your vertex point. So in this case, and you can, if you type that in exactly like that using parentheses and everything, it will tell you the right answer every time. So you don't have to go into steps and like solve each one of those. That's what I'm getting ready to write up here, but you don't have to do that. It will tell you if you type it in exactly like that every time. So what do we get for that value? So you take the 2 that you plugged in, that's your x value, and you got -2. So that gives you the vertex point 2, -2. Again, you plug in the axis value, and you get that y value, 2, -2. So now you can plot that on your axis, 2, -2. So we've got 2 definite points. But since this is your line of symmetry, if you've got this point right here, you've also got this point over here, just using symmetry, because you know it has to be the same on both sides. So you could sketch a parabola at this point with those 3 points. However, I would like you to get a couple more, and that's where the calculators come in. At this point, your book would teach you to plug in 3 into the original equation and solve it out, figure out what your value is. But I'm going to tell you just to type them all in here. You should put them all in there anyway, just to make sure your answer is correct. So let's practice that once. We're just going to type this function in and hit our graph key. So we're going to go to y equals, clear anything that's in there, and make sure that you change that to an equal sign. We don't have an inequality anymore. It's just an equal sign after y1 equals. Hit your x key just like always for the x right here. Then after you put your x there, if you hit this key right here underneath your matrix key, you should be familiar with where that is. It's an x squared key. If you hit that, it'll automatically put a square up there above your x. So hit your x variable, just like always, and then if you hit that little x squared key, it will put the squared up there. So you got x squared. And then the minus 4x plus 2, you should be able to do that. Just make sure you hit minus 4x and not negative 4x. Hit graph, and you should have a parabola that pretty well matches up to the one that we have up there briefly. So then we're looking for a couple other points. How would we get those? Go to the table. So we did second graph. And we can see on there, if x equals 1, we have the point 1, -1. So that would be right here. And then if you've got that point, you can always put it on the other side as well. So that's just a way to get another point. And then sketch the parabola best you can. They don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be pretty neat. If they're not, you're not going to get any credit for it. They got to be pretty neat. The reason you'll need this calculator also sometimes your y-intercept will be right here. Your axis of symmetry will be right here. And your vertex will also be right there. So the three things that we find are all right there. You have no idea where to sketch the parabola. So that's where you'll have to type in here and get a couple other points. You got that point, you got that point. So, but sometimes, like the example we just did, it happened that the three things we found were all three different things. That's not always the case. So make sure you know how to get your points out of your calculator. Any questions on graphing? I will do problem number 2 on the board when I give you your assignment. So if you need to see another one, I'll do that one. Yes. But we do have one other thing out of this section to cover. That is finding a maximum or a minimum. Over on page 238, the key concept there. I'll paraphrase it up here. It says if A, and that's talking about your first value there, the A out of the problem. If A is positive, then the parabola opens up and has a minimum. So just by looking at the problem, looking at A, determining whether it's positive or negative, should tell you which way your parabola opens. And if it's positive, it opens up and you have a minimum. If A is negative, it's the opposite. The parabola opens down. And as a maximum value. So the other set of problems that you'll do in your homework, you do not have to graph anything. Unless you ask me if you have to, and I'm probably going to say yes. You do not have to graph. All you have to do is find out whether it's a maximum or minimum and then find the value by looking at A. So that's what we're going to do in the next example. So f of x equals x squared minus 4x plus 9. So again, no graphing on these problems. You just have to find the maximum or minimum. How do you know whether you have a maximum or a minimum? You look at A. What's A in this problem? A is positive 1. That's what number is right there in front of the x squared. So A is positive 1, so do we have a maximum or a minimum? We have a minimum value, and we have to find it. All that means is you got to find the vertex, which we already know how to do. You first have to find the axis. First of all, though, A is positive. So I would write opens up as minimum. That way you know what you're finding is going to be a minimum. And then find the axis using the same equation from example 1. So what is B in this problem? B is negative 4, its middle value, over 2 times A. We already said A was 1. So what's negative 4 over 2? So this part right here is going to give you negative 2, and then the negative out front and make it become positive 2. So that's the same as example 1 was. So we got our x value, then we plug that in to find the vertex point. Squared minus 4 times 2 plus 9. So what do we get there? Right, positive 5. So our vertex point is 2, 5. Your minimum value is 5. That's whatever you get when you plug in your x value. In this case, we got 5. That's your minimum. So that's all you have to do on that second set of problems is find the minimum or the maximum, which is the vertex point. And homework problems. On page 241. Two through 30 even. Before you start, I need you to look up here one more time. When you're plugging in those values later on the assignment, you will have situations similar to something similar to that. And a lot of you would screw this up without me showing you this, so please pay close attention, and some of you may still do that. Some of you would want to multiply these two numbers. -2 times -2, what is that? 4, and then you would square the 4. What order of operations say? Exponents first, or well, parentheses, and then exponents. So you have to do this before you multiply anything right there. Have to do that on every single problem. You also have to have parentheses around that -2. Again, if you don't, you will get it wrong. If you don't believe me, type those two things in your calculator and see if your answers are the same. So you have to use the parentheses, and you have to do this squaring part first. You can split that up and do it step at a time if you want to. However, if you type that all in exactly like it is right there, you will get the right answer every time, as long as you use the parentheses. Or you can choose to split that up. -2 squared is 4, and then times -2 would be -8, and you can carry on and keep doing that, or you can just type it all in. But have to do this part first before you multiply.